Hello and welcome to today's webinar, The Power of Customer Retention During Uncertain Times. I'm Chris from the marketing team here at OneSignal, and I've got a little housekeeping to do before we get into today's session. First, we will have time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. Please feel free to chat in with any questions, and we'll answer as many as we can during the Q&A portion of today's webinar. Next, I do want to let you know that we will be emailing you all a link to a recording of today's presentation. So you can go back and review it at your convenience in case you missed anything. And finally, I want to introduce today's speaker, Josh Wetzel, Chief Revenue Officer for OneSignal. Josh is a passionate leader with a 20-year track record of driving product adoption and revenue growth within e-commerce, software, and digital media. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you, Chris. I'm excited to be here. It's gonna be some great content. So I'm excited. I know people are still kind of sauntering in. Appreciate you all joining and taking time out of your day. As Chris mentioned, if you aren't able to join, you're watching this later. Appreciate you taking the time then as well. I've had the fortune and the honor to both work in customer acquisition and customer retention roles, utilizing software, and it's been there's a lot you can learn from being on both sides of the spectrum, so to speak. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into the content. Couple things I want to add. We will talk a little bit about LTV, which stands for lifetime value, sort of what is the value of a customer over a long time, and CAC. So what is customer acquisition cost, and sort of the ratio against those. Those are things that are really important to be mindful of as you're developing your program. And ultimately, I mean, I think the question we all have to answer ourselves, the reason why I enjoy what I do is, do you want to continue to bleed users? Do you want to continue to lose users? I suspect the answer is no. If not, then maybe you want to be in a different role. But a big part of that is understanding the LTV and CAC ratio, and then understanding how I can move the needle. And I think at the essence of what I'm going to talk about are sort of three core areas, I think, that are relatively straightforward, that everyone can take advantage of to drive better performance, ultimately retain, have more impact to those consumers that are utilizing your service, and ultimately drive more long-term value with them. So without further ado, I'm going to jump in here. Look, one thing, we'll share this, and there'll actually be a QR code at the end of this to access it, but we produce a State of Customer Messaging report annually. We've done it a couple years now. It's both a qualitative and quantitative look at the market. In that, we asked 1,000 marketers, product managers, and some developers across multiple industries about how they're adapting today's economic climate. We leverage their feedback alongside insights from billions of messages sent daily through the OneSignal system to come up with your effective strategies that can help transform specifically your LTV to CAC ratio and drive long-term success. And it's regardless of economic climate. I think this is important. It just so happens that in lower economic climates, people get more thoughtful about retention because they must, right? We don't have endless acquisition budgets. So let me start off with some of that data and sort of frame this conversation. So one of the questions we asked was, during the economic climate, as your company kind of reducing marketing product spending and improving return on investment, right? 82% of the survey respondents agreed that during a recent economic downturn has caused their company to reduce spending on marketing and product. So, which is fine, but I think it's important to note, like, there's other studies out there that show, including this one from Bain in 2008, post 2008 financial crisis. What they did was they did a deep dive on the economic climate. What was the performance of companies in this particular case who specifically focused on increasing customer acquisition during downturn versus focused on customer retention. And what they found, and you can go and read this study, it's pretty lengthy and detailed. What they found overall was that companies that focused on retention actually had higher growth rates. And the biggest aha there, and I think when you read in the details of this, what the one takeaway would be, the reason why ultimately is because they're doing what's important for their customer. They're getting that customer to impact with their product. They're thinking through what are the inflection points that are going to help drive value, whether it's getting them set up properly with the service, getting them utilizing some piece of a feature or functionality, have that impact that's necessary. Those things have long-term transformative LTV impacts to drive up LTV, and it actually it allows you to, in the long run, spend more on customer acquisition costs, but increasing that ratio makes your organization more profitable, which is what I'll talk about here as we go through. So let me just hammer home why retention is so important. If you just look at it, 10-day user retention in mobile apps, in 10 days, right? So for every user you get, you're going to have approximately only 10% of those after 10 days. This is a really, really important a point of retention. If you look at 30 days, and this is kind of taking a broader view, looking at category, and there's some anomalies here. Obviously, news seems to be an outlier, but you're now in the 3 to 5% range, variance based on category. And again, there's going to be variance based on your particular product, your brand, how well you're doing in these cohorts in terms of having that impact. But retention is a critical part of success. If you can just move this 1-2 basis points, you're going to have tremendous more success, and ultimately a lot more LTV, a lot more value from your users that you can reinvest in the business. So in that survey, I mentioned in the state of customer messaging, how important is customer retention in your company's overall business strategy? 95% said it was very important or somewhat important, which makes sense, total logical sense. And I think the question is, how much are you actually investing in the time and effort? And when you think about allocation of resources and specifically your time, are you investing in that? So what I want to talk about now is increasing that user engagement retention. Businesses can actually increase LTV, as I touched on the 10 and 30 slides. But specifically, just to hammer this point home, increasing customer retention rates just by 5% can increase overall profits by 25 to 95%. Well, yeah, so wide variance, 25 to 95. Some business models are different. The economic models vary, but still 5% increase in retention can lead to 25% increase in profits. That's a really, really important number, and the compounding impact on each customer, each basis point you can improve that retention is really, really powerful. So 3 ways to calculate LTV. I'm not going to go into every little detail here. I think it depends on your business. If you have questions about LTV, I'm happy to answer them in the question Q&A section. But it's important to know what your LTV is, because it dovetails to all the other things you're going to want to do with CAC down the road. So hammer this additional point home. If you can increase your LTV, so your lifetime value, by 1%, you can increase revenue by 10 to 12%. That's really powerful. Here's a really simple LTV CAC ratio. A lot of businesses should be thinking about this, and on the marketing side, if you really understand customer lifetime value, you can move it up by increasing retention and understanding customer acquisition costs. That delta is your LTV to CAC ratio. 2 is very good. Greater than 2 is even better. A lot of businesses operate at negative, right? In a growth stage, you're just trying to acquire users. You really don't want to be in negative very long. That's not a sustainable business. Okay, so let me talk about how do you improve these things. This is the meat of the content. This is what I want you to leave with. There's really 3 core things that if you take anything from this, please be thoughtful about these 3 things. We are entered an era where consumers are engaging with your service and your product in multiple ways. Every single person in your life probably has a slight preference, particularly depending on the type of message, for a different channel. Some people I know still really check their email, and email is still core to what they're doing each and every day. I personally, I use email. I'm required to use email for my work. I check my personal email every 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days. So if you're sending me an urgent message or you're trying to onboard me into a service, you do not want to use an email for me. You must use a text or likely a push notification. So again, other people different ways. You have to have omni-channel messaging for your consumers. It's really critical. If you're only using email and it's over here, and maybe you have push over there and they're not coordinated, you're missing a golden opportunity to have a cohesive, consistent conversation throughout the life cycle of your customer's experience with your service, your product. And it's really difficult to really understand and move the needle on your LTV and ultimately reduce CAC. Okay, so let me talk about, there's 3 core areas that I think are critical that every business should implement on these customer journeys to reduce churn and increase retention. First and foremost, and the sort of number one thing you should all be doing is architecting and constantly iterating on onboarding sequence. I want everyone, if anything you take away from this session, please start thinking about getting away from one-off campaigns to like effervescent, consistent journeys, and then constantly work to iterate and improve those journeys. And the number one journey you should be creating for your business is an onboarding journey. Why? Because it's the first touch point you have with that consumer. It's the first time they've downloaded your app, the first time they come to your service, signed up for something. You want to make sure that they're hitting those important touch points with your service. It may be filling out a profile page. It may be setting a preference. It may be connecting to a creator or a friend. Whatever that may be, you want to architect that onboarding to make sure they hit that first inflection point or that first gate with your product. And ideally, over time, you develop this onboarding. You A/B test each point of the journey. You architect it to be a fairly complex, let's call it 15, 20 steps to get them through multiple gates. So that you know, I've gotten to this consumer to a place where they're adding value. They're gaining value. Like my product is enriching their life. It's doing what we intend for them to do. So onboarding is critical, and it's amazing to me. We work with over 2 million companies at OneSignal. We work with over 1 million companies. Over 2 million people use the product. We deliver 12 billion messages a day, and I still come across some very legitimate large businesses who don't have any onboarding sequence at all. And so I can't stress this is very important. Start with this. Second, post-purchase. So this could be, I signed up for a newsletter, I bought a subscription to a content service or a streaming service, I made a food order, I bought shoes, whatever it may be. What's that experience after they've had this engagement with your product? It's very important to delight them, constantly stay top of mind, but don't overburden. I would recommend never over messaging, but the right touch points on a consistent basis can do wonders to driving, again, incremental loyalty and incremental engagement, whatever it may be. And then lastly, and this is very important. Again, it's not as important as the onboarding. It's not as important as sort of engaging with the product. But when users have sort of lost interest for whatever reason, it may be they changed their phone. It may be that they came in for one specific purpose. They got that purpose, they left. But what we would call a kind of re-engagement journey. So building a journey to continue to try to be top of mind, to reinforce the value prop, and continue to work with them to drive them back into your service. Again, you don't want to over message here, but taking a long view and constantly kind of reminding them again and taking omni-channel. It's really important you're hitting them in multiple channels, because if you're sending me emails, they're going into my, I wouldn't call it spam box, but they're going into my, I guess, social box or whatever the box is called in the Gmail service. And I've never seen them. But if you send me a push in an appropriate amount of time, there's a chance I'll engage with that. So this is a critical component. So those are the three kind of categories, or three kind of areas I would say everyone needs to have omni-channel journeys. There's a lot more though. Everyone's business is unique. So if there's an important point in the life cycle of your users, you want to be thoughtful about how do I build a automated consistent journey that engages those users during that period of time. Let me just talk a little bit about some examples. So this is the, and I promise I won't bore you here. This is the example of a mobile marketer, Lucy. She's a mobile growth marketer, went to college for marketing, got really excited, came out of school, was all about mobile. She's in that generation where she grew up with a mobile phone, grew up texting, grew up with push, grew up with email. Everything was done through her phone. She lives in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and she took a job with a company called BNBit. BNBit is a cryptocurrency wallet and kind of trading platform, and has expanded into crypto loans and a bunch of different crypto kind of fintech products, if you will. She had worked in a few mobile agencies and kind of had paid her dues through that before she went client side and worked at BNBit. She got to BNBit, they had a ton of interest, and just very greenfield. They had an app, they were rapidly growing. They were a small, fast-growing startup. Didn't have a tremendous amount of resources, particularly on the kind of marketing side, to architect or build things internally. She inherited, she inherited OneSignal. And again, this is a solution. By the way, all of these things I'm talking about, there's many solutions you can use. It's just not just OneSignal. Obviously, I'm biased. I'm a big believer in the OneSignal product, but there's many products out there that are very powerful. In this case, she had inherited OneSignal, which is why I know this story. She started playing around with it. She reached out to us. We had some good engagement and sort of strategy sessions on like, what are you trying to accomplish? And she was pretty basic. She's like, we need to have some onboarding touch points to get them to fill out their profile, to fund their account. We need to get them to engage in making their first trade, post-trade, that sort of post-purchase, if you will. What are the sequence of events? And starting off with just with push and in-app messaging, she was able to build an onboarding a sequence, a journey that was able to drive up greater retention and engagement with the initial downloads of users, got greater funding of the account, and really over time added additional channels. So added email, added these channels that enabled them to architect more intricate journeys. And then even when they launched their crypto loan product, which I mentioned up at the top, they were able to immediately drive really good usage and success with that product. So over time, without having used a ton of resources internally, she was able to create kind of all those three and many more kind of journey sequences, drove quite a bit of success within the business, was promoted, and eventually did such a great job, was recruited out and took on another job with another organization. So again, really simple stuff, but just taking that thoughtful approach of I need to build an onboarding sequence. I need to make sure I'm engaging my users when they're hitting those inflection points, so they're making a purchase, and you see fantastic results. Here's two more examples. Kyivstar is a telecom company in Ukraine, so they're effectively a state-owned utility. They've been using OneSignal for many years. They started building journey sequences both for onboarding and for transactions, and you can see they generated quite a bit of revenue on this. This is a case study on the website. You can see this data was from 2021, and I think the case study was published in early 2022. So prior to some of the events going on there, but they continue to use the product, and they've got these consistent customer journeys that enable them to have kind of the best possible experience for every new customer who downloads the app and is engaging with the experience. And lastly, I'll talk about just real quickly Beach Bum Games. So they have large game studios, grown quite a bit. Similar situation. They started building journeys specifically at the front end, make sure they're getting their users set up properly, engaged in the games, and then ultimately keeping them re-engaged, getting those inflection points. So they're driving both engagement, but quite frankly, for them, they want the revenue, right? So they're trying to drive paid users to purchase and have success with the product. So overall, again, what I wanted to leave you with was the fact that it's really important to drive retention is to have architected, consistent, not one-off, but consistent customer journeys that are enabling users to engage with your product, have impact, show them the value that they should be getting. And that's how you're going to drive both at the front end, better engagement. And then, again, your business is going to be unique, understanding what are those periods of where you're going to have success with revenue, where you're going to have success in driving that impact. And then when those users do go quiet or go dormant, how do you re-engage them, right? Just moving the needle on a very small portion of those can be that 1 or 2 basis points of improvement at the front end on retention on that 30-day, 60, 90, 180. They can have a material impact on your LTV and ultimately allow you to engage, invest more in that CAC. So on that note, really appreciate you joining. Here's a QR code for the State of Customer Messaging report. You're able to download that. At this stage, I've got time for questions, so I really appreciate anybody who wants to ask anything. Please feel free to put it in the chat, and we can go from there.
Yes, thank you so much for that, Josh. I do have a few questions, but yes, please, we have some time. So if anything comes to mind that you'd like to pose to our speaker, just put that in the chat. So first off, you mentioned every marketer should be using push and email. Could you share examples of messages best suited for push, as well as types of messages that are best suited for email?
Yeah, that's a great question, and oftentimes I think we skirt over that. So it's basically that the principle I would think about is anything that you need long form or needs to have needs to be sort of stored for a long period of time. So think a receipt, a contract, a long form kind of like, hey, summary of new product additions or functionality. That should always be email. Because it's asynchronous. You're not trying to somebody to take an immediate action. It's not something that they need to see and work on in this moment. Anything that is more real time, or you need them to take action. So if you're trying to get them to fill out a profile or come connect to a friend or take immediate action, that's got to be a push notification or an SMS. If you're trying to do 2FA, right? So in a security use case, I still see so many businesses sending email that sometimes that's really difficult to go find. You want to send that through push or through SMS. In fact, one of the best use cases I found is to get higher subscription and opt-ins for push. You do a 2FA use case where you're asking for subscription, and it's just very fundamentally, it's easy. We have actually many fintech kind of banks that do this, where they get higher subscription and it's real time. So they'll send you a push notification. You click on the push notification and it verifies that you're the user. And then they log you in even though you've put your password in. So that's actually a pretty common use case we're seeing for compliance and security reasons with fintechs. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. All right, next question we have. How do you recommend driving users to hit critical customer lifecycle milestones with journeys?
Well, a lot of it's trial and error. So I think, sometimes you're going to want to use really good imagery. You want good call to action. Sometimes people want to put out questions that are like affirmative, like yes. I would argue sometimes you want to go the opposite. Sometimes you want to affirm and give the consumer the notion of no. You want to get them to say no, because then they feel like they have more control and more power. So I think a lot of it's going to be figuring out what your particular, again, your business and what you're trying to get to. So like one example for a gaming studio that we've worked with was they had actually send out, do you want to disappoint your friend and not rejoin the game on a push? And you would click it, and most people say, no, I don't. And they feel like they've got control, they click it and you go in, and they had really good success taking that strategy as an example. I think with email imagery, emojis have always been really effective. I'm not sure why, I guess it's the visual. I was always an emoji naysayer until I saw the data. So I think it's a lot of it's trial and error. You've got to work through it, and that's where I would stress putting the time is when you architect each journey from onboarding, whether it's re-engagement, kind of that purchase phase. as taking those three as examples, you want to kind of work through each instance. Some will be obvious, some you want to spend more time with.
Thank you. Awesome. All right, we have another one here. What are some strategies for reducing user churn?
So to me, churn is all one, you have to recognize the fact that some consumers will come to your service or product and just not find the value, or they'll get the value and they'll move on, and you will lose users. But the important thing is, are you delivering value? And constantly, like, I think every message needs to be one that's driving towards the value of the product or service. If you're not architecting that way, if it's all about me, then me being the business or the product, it's easy for people to dismiss it. So you really want to constantly think, what does a consumer need? What do they want here? And again, you can there's some psychology involved here, like I mentioned on the affirmative versus the getting a consumer to say no, and that's actually, you're going to get higher engagement from that. Ironically, I think there's a lot of that goes into it, and quite frankly, that's the fun. But it just takes time. But you got to recognize that you are going to have some churn. The question is, how do I make sure that every touch point is one that delivers value for a consumer, so that they want to invest and they want to continue to utilize my product?
Right. That makes a ton of sense. And that kind of perfectly segues into this last question that we have here. How much is too much? Are there ways to tell if a customer messaging strategy is having a negative impact, such as increasing churn?
That's a wonderful question. And if I had a great answer that would suffice everybody, I would give it. We work with some entertainment, media, news organizations that send a ton of email and a massive number of push notifications, and consumers overwhelmingly like it because it's part of this. So think, a major media network or a sports league, like it's a fire hose of information, but for whatever reason, most consumers appreciate it. I would say that the more you can involve your consumers in that discussion, the better. So an example would be setting preferences where you're asking them, do you want a fire hose, or do you want, or do you only want this specific thing? So the more you can personalize the experience based on what that consumer wants, the better. A great example would be a newspaper where somebody maybe only wants to read the technology section or the sports section, and they can opt into that versus sending them everything. Or maybe they only want breaking news. I think it's a very difficult question, and it really depends on your product. So for example, I wouldn't want to say to say a rideshare service or a food delivery service, only send me one notification a week, because then when I actually order something and I need those notifications to know kind of where that delivery or the car is in its life cycle and engaging with me and picking me up and driving me somewhere, I may not get that message, right? So there's a situation where 10 or 15 messages make sense, versus, say somebody e-commerce service, if they're sending me 15, 20 messages a day, that's overwhelming. I'm probably going to turn it off and maybe even delete the app.
Right. Well, that's perfect. I see we are just at time now, and that's all the questions that we have. So I just want to thank you, Josh, for your time today. And then, of course, I want to thank everyone for joining us, whether you watched live or watching on demand. And again, just a reminder, you will get a link to a recording of this in your email very soon. And thank you all again. We'll see you at the next webinar.
Yeah, thank you all. I really appreciate it. Have an awesome Wednesday. Thank you.